We've now entered into Season 7 of the Outlast Trials. Season 6 was good. We learned more about our good friend Lilia Bogomolova and saw how her influence was starting to spread all across the facility, affecting guards, reagents, and even Easterman himself. We saw glimpses of Amelia being kept alive in a catatonic state, and Easterman would tend to visit her a lot. Season 6 lore bleeds over into Season 7 as we're now seeing how Lilia is also affecting the Prime assets in this update. We've also got a new X-Pop archetype, the Biter, and these guys have an interesting origin story too. There have been improvements made to Invasion as well, and these changes are also explained in the lore. Basically, we have 13 new documents to unpack today, so it's clear the narrative team for the Outlast Trials have been busy at work, giving us more world building for this messed up game universe. We're going to get into the lore now, and I'll provide context where relevant and refer back to things that happened in previous seasons. And please be aware that there will be spoilers for the Outlast series in this video. Let's begin. Okay, so the Biter is something that we've seen before. We saw the Biter archetype in one of the Murkoff account comics, and Clyde Perry used one of these to force information out of Doris Ritter, the shadowy dame, as to the identity of Amelia's boyfriend who was also in the trials, a guy called Damon Green, and as we know, Damon got killed by Clyde. But what of the origins of the Biter? According to their X-Pop classification report, they are defined as psycho-sadists. This means that they lack empathy and derive pleasure from inflicting pain or seeing it inflicted on others, therefore seeing cruelty as a form of reward. In a dive into their psychology, they are described as former prisoners from work camps, who, in an attempt to avoid slave labour, severed their Achilles tendons, thereby making themselves not capable of work. They'd also resort to cutting off their own hands or feet. They'd been subjected to this behavioural conditioning in the hope that they would become more docile, but as a result of this conditioning, they ended up responding more to punishment than reward. They would seek out ways to inflict pain on themselves and engaged in self-mutilation. Upon being taken to Sinyala, this only exacerbated their condition, and this was thanks to Lilia's presence at the facility. Much like she would convince people, her followers, to mutilate their own bodies, the Biters did the same. Most likely because they were preconditioned to seek out this type of behaviour before they even arrived. But she just made it worse. To prevent their self-mutilation, the staff at Sinyala put them through brachial amputations, removal of part of the arms above the elbows, and what's interesting is what the male Biters did to their genitalia. Remember in Season 6 it was revealed that Lilia kept the appendage of the Nazi officer that assaulted her, Klaus von Kant, the hummingbird, in a jar, calling it a relic. Well, the doctors at Sinyala think that the male Biters were removing their genitalia on the direction of Lilia. In terms of their augmentations, the Biters would be made to resemble gamecocks, having foot prosthetics with long sharp blades on them and reticulated blade mandibles, and the feet had spring loaders in them to reduce their reaction time. After they were augmented, the Biters, since they had been given prophylactic treatment, likely penicillin or other treatments to prevent infection from their self-mutilation, they were to be put under continuous observation. They were apparently incapable of speech, but if they would attempt to form words, this should be recorded for analysis. Another of Murkoff's brilliant ideas was to hold a blood drive event at Sinyala. Reagents were forced to donate their blood before they could even leave the trial to head back to the sleep room. At some point, one of these extractors malfunctioned and killed a reagent, draining them of their blood. On the 8th of July 1961, the architect there at Sinyala, Moses Scarfiotti, is talking to Cornelius Noakes, a man who many of you will know as a sleep room engineer. He keeps everything running in the trials and is being forced to be here. Anyway, Scarfiotti shows Noakes a photo of the dead and drained reagent, with Noakes grimacing and saying the reagent looks like a raisin. Scarfiotti reveals they're using the reagent's blood to measure the hormonal changes during the trials and how those changes happen under different conditions. Basically, Moses needs Noakes to fix this and to make the devices safe. Judging by reagents now being able to use these blood extractors, it's safe to assume that he managed to do it. Back in October 1957, the Soviet Union launched the Sputnik 1 satellite. Now, this event caused widespread fear and panic in the West, especially in America, as a lot of Americans believed that they, America, were the global leaders in scientific advancement. The Soviets being able to have the technology to launch a satellite into space put the fear into the generals and the US military, as they believed this advancement meant the Soviets would soon, if they didn't already, have the ability to launch ICBMs across continents, since Sputnik 1 was itself launched using a modified ICBM missile. It birthed what was known in the US as the Sputnik crisis. America had long been comfortable with the fact that they were quite a distance from the Soviet Union, and that any missiles directed at them would have to fly over Europe, but this new development had made them feel very vulnerable. The generals in the US military often referred to this as a technological Pearl Harbor, and this crisis was the reason behind the birth of the Advanced Research Projects Agency, or ARPA for short, which would eventually become DARPA, with this agency being led by Roy W. Johnson, and a civilian agency was set up too, with this one being NASA. Intelligence does show, however, that the US did know about the potential launch of the Sputnik 1 satellite weeks before it launched. Anyway, CIA liaison to Murkoff, Jameson Lawler, wrote to Alice Avianos on the 20th of October 1957, just 2 weeks after the Sputnik launch, and mentioned one of these US Army generals had been spiraling over the crisis. He's been aggressively engaging in what Lawler calls extracurricular activities, and he poses a threat to the agency because of things he knows. They can't spare the resources to keep him under surveillance to ensure that he doesn't expose CIA assistants. Perhaps this is a new prime asset being teased here, and maybe we'll get a new Murkoff account comic showing another of the late Clyde Perry's recruitment trips, and maybe we'll find out a bit more about these extracurricular activities the general has been engaging in. What's interesting though is something that was found that links this general to Coyle. It's a very minor link, but it gives us a little bit more backstory on Coyle. On the 23rd of August 1951, shortly after Coyle had been recruited and taken to Sinjala, a pamphlet was found inside his home. A note states that there's no evidence of any direct interaction between the general and Coyle, but that their journeys may have crossed at some point. Anyway, the pamphlet reads, "Patriots, stand up. Time is running out. The enemy is slant drilling your freedom." It then says the sons of blank want you, and that military training would be provided. So who is this organisation and why were they training people? Well, the closest match I could find, and one that lined up with Coyle's dialogue and his hatred for communism and communists, was the Patriotic Order Sons of America, POS of A, which was a nativist group founded by Dr. Raynell Coates in the 1840s during the anti-immigration riots. They were Protestants and were anti-Catholic, opposing the Irish and German immigrants that had arrived in America due to periods of turmoil in their own countries. Ireland was in the midst of the Great Famine at the time. Protestants were concerned that the Catholics would try to subvert American democracy, as they were loyal to the Pope. Anyway, more relevant to this timeline, years later during the Cold War, the group would emerge as a staunch anti-communist group. I could be way off here, but the group's values, at least in the 1950s, matches Coyle's anti-communist sentiments, and they're the only group that matched this time frame. Lastly on this, the pamphlet mentions slant drilling. It's apparently an engineering technique used for tapping reservoirs from one location without disturbing the surface. I guess the fear here was that communism would do this and cause a deep rot in the US. One example used in a real-world context would be the Gulf War. In the 1990s, Iraq and Kuwait shared an oil field, but Saddam Hussein, who the US had even called the Middle East's own Manuel Noriega, said that Kuwait was slant drilling into Iraq's share of the oil field, and used this as pretext to launch the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. But now onto this new trial environment. Sometime around May 1961, Easterman approaches Leland Coyle, asking him if he's ready for something new. Coyle says that he's been waiting a long time for something new. A subtle joke for the community, as it's been a long time since Coyle got a new trial. Easterman says they'll be studying prison and systems of control. Coyle tells Easterman that if you want to control somebody, you shower them with love and you let them go, and then wait for them to crawl on back. If they deserve it, then you give them permission to, as Coyle puts it, lick the leather. Easterman's motivation behind this trial is shown by a question he asks, asking how do you discipline a subject, thus learn to crave punishment as much as the reward. Easterman argues that if you love someone, let them go. But he says that if you hate someone, if you despise them, then you should hold them close. This is why Easterman has been keeping Amelia close. He despises her. She wants to destroy everything he wants to build. During a conversation on the 27th of May 1961, Easterman is once again battling against Alice Avianos and Moses Scarfiotti, as Easterman has got more ideas that will pose a threat to the integrity of the security there at Sinjala. Essentially, Easterman wants to give Coyle more autonomy in the Penal Farm. He basically tells Scarfiotti that containment is his responsibility, and that Coyle having privileges over the Penal Farm warden are absolutely vital to this study. He argues that as they're making killers and saboteurs, it's quite easy to forget sometimes that Murkoff are making sleeper agents that provide maximum deniability for the US. They're going to need levers of control, and that aggression has to be tempered with these levers. He describes Coyle as the clearest example of authority there at Signala. Easterman has given Coyle a gift, which is the Warden. One thing they all agree on is where the US prison system is headed over the next few years and decades. Scarfiotti mentions a study that looked at the effect of prisons on communities in Alabama, a political and commercial impact, and Avianos says that prisons will be a real growth industry. The study that Scarfiotti is talking about are sociological studies from the 1950s, which showed that penal farms such as Kilby and Atmore destabilised entire communities. The study revealed that these prison farms were basically an extension of convict lease systems, whereby inmates would be forced to do penal labour, but this practice died out around the 1940s. When Avianos talks about these prisons being a growth industry, she's talking about a correct assumption that things like the war on drugs and mandatory minimum sentences would mean that prisons would fill up pretty quickly, meaning that money was to be made here by the private corrections companies who operated their own prisons. Other companies that would profit would be telecommunications companies who could set up phone lines into the prison, private healthcare companies, and catering companies too. Prisoners could also be put to work in skilled jobs for extremely low pay, government incarceration leading to corporate profit, something termed the prison industrial complex. But back to the conversation. Aviana says they'll need a good pitch to take to the Murkoff board, as currently they're a bit concerned about the level of collateral damage in terms of operations. Easterman tells her to offer them levers of control, but Scarfiotti responds that he said that about invasion, but that the imposters are being bullied by the reagents, who have basically now become even more aggressive. Scarfiotti says that invasion will need revising, and he puts forward balancing tools. Turning his attention back to Coyle's new prison environment, Easterman says that reagents will identify with the Warden, and they'll see that Coyle is just a bully. Scarfiotti isn't convinced that this will have the effect Easterman is hoping for, calling this a prison within a prison, but Easterman, who has some grand delusion that he's actually helping the reagents through their therapy, takes exception to this, calling Signala the polar opposite of a prison. This conversation ends with Easterman accusing Scarfiotti of intentionally misunderstanding the work they do there at Signala. More tensions brewing between these two. Great to see. It's not until July that the board would authorise this programme, named the Boneyard, indicating that they had some trouble convincing them the risk here would be worth the reward. But that doesn't matter, the programme has been authorised, with the board stating that Coyle should undergo regular blood tests to measure his response to this new environment, and that he should be allocated penicillin. Coyle has been noted as having a more than usual eagerness to repeat this trial. But let's move on now, onto Amelia. Right, yeah, so as you see there, Amelia has escaped. Again. And Easterman is fuming. In the aftermath of this, on the 10th of June 1961, Easterman is speaking with Alice Avianos, and there's a blame game taking place. He accuses her of telling him the hospital was secure when it wasn't, and she tells him that she told him to just euthanize Amelia. She's right, she did. But Easterman didn't want the reagents to view her as a martyr. This is why he had her strung up in the sleep room, until he got a little bit too worried about the reagents viewing her as a messianic symbol of hope, and removed her. He's previously written in his journal about watching her sleep, that she smiles in her sleep, and he thinks that even though she's in a catatonic state, she's up to something. Easterman says that she must have had help, as she'd been laid up in bed for so long that her muscles had atrophied. We saw something similar back in Season 6, where a reagent was pulled out of the trials with a burst fracture in their spine, with the surgeons saying that this reagent should have been catatonic, but was just repeating words and phrases suffering from echolalia. Maybe this is how Amelia was able to escape despite her having been bedridden for around an entire year. Aviano suggests tracking her down inside the crawl spaces and gassing her to death, but again, Easterman refuses to kill her for the very same reason. Because her influence on the reagents, Easterman's children, so to speak, is greater than his, and he knows it. He then has another freak out and cuts himself, badly, with there being blood everywhere, but he tells Avianos to calm down, shuts the door, and he tells her he needed to focus. He tells her that he knows she's been spending time in the hospital wing, and he straight up accuses her of lying to him. The following day, Easterman has taken triple his usual dose of promethazine, a drug that can calm someone. He writes that he's calm and he's armed with a useful anger. He questions how Amelia could have recruited co-conspirators, but she couldn't have done it physically. So he suggests some lingering messianic influence. He suggests Avianos is responsible, of course, just as he did the day prior, but he also suggests Lilia. Now, this is just a theory, but given how Lilia can quite literally drive men to mutilate themselves in devotion to her, it's possible that she can control people. Lilia is more than aware of the egregore, the collective consciousness forming between the reagents at Signala. She actively speaks through it, into the heads of the reagents. Easterman finishes by stating that he's hearing whispering, which is Lilia's influence. Could it be that Lilia drove him to harm himself when speaking with Avianos? This is perhaps why he hurt himself, in order to take his focus off the whispering in his head. Perhaps this is why those people devoted to Lilia harmed themselves as they were trying to silence her voice. Maybe. Again, until we get more information, that's just a theory at this point. Finally, a shard of glass was discovered in the X-Pop holding area, and investigating it, staff found it was from Amelia's glasses, and security were to conduct a thorough search of this area. You may be thinking that one of the X-Pops helped her out. I doubt this though, as they are extremely devoted to Easterman and his therapy, being made up from the original deeply scarred test subject from the first and failed phase, Project Lathe. Let's finish with a glimpse into what Coyle is experiencing during his time in the trials. In the previous Lilia trial, there was a puzzle to solve, and there was a hidden document that shed a bit more light into Lilia's gospel, if you will. We got another such puzzle here, with the same kind of secret document, this time written by Coyle. He talks about a bitch in the walls, being Amelia. He talks about people contaminating his crime scene and hearing the voices of his dead wives, who he may or may not have murdered. These two voices, who he says may be his wives, may instead be him hearing the voices of both Lilia and Amelia talking through the egregore. Coyle has, quite hilariously, expressed his utter confusion during the trials as to who the hell Ed Gregor is. He writes about the Whitecoats, the Signala medical staff, about how they jack him up using Benzedrine, which makes him extremely violent and aggressive, and then they put him to work. As Coyle writes here, he's pent up to such an extreme that he grinds his teeth so hard they crack. He basically writes here that instilling discipline makes him hard. He then talks about Amelia walking around in the walls of the police station trial environment, and she's talking in the walls. He doesn't know it's Amelia, basically saying here that Phyllis is too fat, and that Franco wouldn't fit either as he resembles a bowling trophy as he's got a massive head. He says that after he's finished in the trials, the doctors knock him out using Sterno, which is a gel containing high levels of methanol, nicknamed canned heat, and is typically used as a fuel source for the home, used to keep small dishes hot, and so on. He talks of dreams that leave marks. Perhaps this links into Wernicke's invasive dream therapy, and one interesting point on that is that Wernicke shows up in the blood dreams at the start of the Coyle trial. Perhaps he's gotten very interested in the Signala egregore. Finally, Coyle writes that dead wives don't talk. He's wondering who is speaking to him. But that's it for this lore roundup. Season 7 is off to a great start. I'll be slowly working on a video cramming all of the Season 5 and 6 lore into one video like I did with the others. If you liked this video, then please be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on some of the theories I've shared in this video, but for now take care, and I'll see you in the next one.